Hey, welcome to another Roots Review. Today we're going to go over the Jefferson Curl and its purpose, theory, etc. We've previously looked at spinal segmentation exercises or roll-ups in the bridge position, in a wall supported position. If you haven't done those before, go back to that first. That's a necessary requirement in order to be able to do this movement safely and well. Something else that's really important to acknowledge in the purpose behind these movements is that we don't believe there's any unhealthy or unsafe position of a joint to load. Only believe that there are unsafe loads in those joint positions. Alternatively, we should actually be loading every single angle our joints can go into with control so that we have the greatest injury prevention and lowest injury risk when we're moving around. If we leave a gap in that system where we don't know where we are, that's when things can start to go a little bit more likely awry. So on this exercise, we may have already warmed up with a spinal segmentation, especially of the lower back. The Jefferson Curl, which we're going to do today, goes into a deficit position, so you'll need to stand on top of something. Sometimes people prefer one specific support, like a stool or a box, but maybe not something as high as a bench in the short term. As we start to create depth, we may need a little bit more of the negative space, but we'll see how that comes together as we go. Speaking of the appropriate loads, we're going to start with, this is a 10 kilo weight that I've got here. I would say no more than 8 kilos, 10 kilos to start, and probably not less than that. Our lower bodies are strong. They just need to be loaded appropriately and safely. If you've already been working on spinal segmentation, especially at load, you can choose whatever weight you've previously used. I usually fluctuate between these two to bring it into this exercise. Reviewing the spinal segmentation and contrasting it with a deadlift will help us introduce this movement. For the spinal segmentation, especially into flexion, which is the direction that we're going, this curving forwards, we're gonna round and let our spine take the most roundiest, curviest position as possible. But I've got my cheeks squeezed and my hips are not moving. So I come into this bottom position where my spine is as shrimpy, fully curled as possible without letting my hips bend. How do we know if my hips haven't bent? Well, your hips have not bent. So when you look down, your hips should be flat and open on the front, just like they were when you were standing. If they've changed position at all, we've started to crease them and move the control of the movement out of the zone that we're trying to start with into somewhere else. This is part of the purpose of the wall variation. We just get a little bit of feedback on the wall, so head back to that if you haven't done that before. When doing a deadlift, we're then trying to hinge only the hip and not at all move in the lower back. The Jefferson Curl is going to move the hip and the back together, but in timing and with control. So if we were going to make sense of this movement, we're going to first start with the segmental rolling, and then once we get to that bottom position, we're then going to let our hips come with us, and our back just stays nice and curvy and juicy, and we're going to reverse the same way. So the first thing to happen is to squeeze myself straight from my hips, and then unravel all the way up. As you may have noticed, it looked like I had a little bit more room to go to when I got to the bottom of the position, so we're going to take ourselves up to the stool so we can play around with some of that negative space. In order to do that negative space without reaching and leaning forwards, you're going to put yourself with the ball of your foot at the edge of the stool, but your big toes are going to hang off, and that just helps that place where the weight was at have a little bit of negative space to pass through. Alternatively, you could stand on 2 plates or 2 separate stools with a hole in the middle or a gap in the middle so that the weight also had room to pass. Either way, you want to make that easy for yourself without needing to lean around and in front of the edge. When we lean around and in front of the edge, it changes where the load is placed and can put us at a small risk for a back injury, which is why we're going to start nice and light with no more than 10 kilos or 22 something pounds. Again, we're going to round and curl and roll and shrimp ourselves down to this position. Then we let the hips follow alongside us until we come into this super lengthened, longest position possible. Push through the step, squeeze our butts at the top, and unravel our spine. If this is the first time you're doing this movement, it's really important that you don't go to your deepest possible range and that you just learn how to move everything in timing. If you're already going to your lowest possible range and you haven't created control there, that's when the load can feel a little bit intense on the tissues that we're moving through. If you feel a pulling down the back of your legs, especially that passes into your calves or feet, you're going to want to go back and visit the nerve flossing video just to do a quick warm up with. Nerve flossing can be more beneficial than what we usually prescribe it for. It's not just for people with nerve pain, but just like we stretch preventatively, we can floss nerves preventatively. I'm going to do a couple with my heavier weight now that I feel a little bit more warmed up. Toes hanging off the edge, making sure we're curling and flowing. Upper body stays totally relaxed. Push through the ground so you control where the movement's coming from and unravel. You're gonna feel this both in your back and your back extensors, as well as your hamstrings and glutes if you do it right. It is okay, not only okay, but desirable to load our spine. What we don't load, we can't protect and control. So this is helpful for our spine, for being resilient when I'm going to grab something from the floor with a curved back and pick it up. My spine is now prepared for that position movement load, even if it's just re-racking my weights or picking up my child or a book or something from the floor. It's the movement plus the load that we've now exposed ourselves to, so it's prepared and less surprising to the body. If we've had a previous back injury, this is going to be at a very distant place as far as progressions. So going back to the easier spinal segmentation and exploring control from the hips versus the spine and really making sure everything's super clear and you've done the wall loaded variations before even coming to the Jefferson curl is really, really important to make sure that you're keeping yourself out of additional injuries or flares.